And welcome to Sci-Fi Guy. This is Will, as usual, your usual Will, your Sci-Fi Guy. And I know right away the title is going to disturb people or ruffle some feathers or just generally upset not a large portion, I don't think a large portion of the fan base, of the Star Trek fan base, Trekkers, Trekkies. Nicolas Cage calls himself a Trekkie, so I guess it's good enough for me. Boy, if it's good enough for Nicolas Cage, then yep, I'm a Trekkie. Recent article, he said he's a Trekkie, so... But the title, yes, Gene Roddenberry is Star Trek. And I stand by that. And let's discuss why.
Maximum what?
So, you've got Star Trek, the original series, then the movies. Oh, wait, the animated series. I guess in order, the animated series. And then you have the movies, the feature films. Then Star Trek The Next Generation, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Star Trek Voyager, and Star Trek Enterprise. Don't get me started with Paramount Plus. That's a whole different ball game, whole different ball of wax. But Star Trek in that evolutionary terms from the original series up until the prequel series, Captain Archer, Scott Bakula, Enterprise, and this is certainly the sort of playground, the domain of Star Trek, which Gene Roddenberry most greatly influenced, impacted. The new stuff, again, don't get me started. That could be another whole podcast, another whole entire show. So, why is Gene Roddenberry Star Trek? To me, and to, of course, many Trekkies, Trekkers, to most of us, I'd say, it's not the credits, the writing credits, the development credits, the based upon credits. We could go through Next Generation, Deep Space Nine. Roddenberry is credited with the first two, of course, the original series and Next Generation. Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, these are all Rick Berman, Michael Piller, Jerry Taylor, various writers, and always having a based upon credit from Gene. So I'm not talking writing credits. I wrote for Star Trek, I wrote for Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. Many people have. So it's not, the devil might be in the details, but it's not the focused or specific writing credits. It's all about the spirit of Star Trek. It's the spirit of something. Look at Star Wars. I mean, people could argue about Disney Star Wars, the prequels, but George Lucas was the glue, the creator, and the glue that held that together. And certainly, again, with new Star Wars, you've got many, legacy old classic fans that do enjoy it. Many do not. And then, of course, new people have brought into the fold. So it's very similar to Trek, whereas you've got this huge universe, this Trekverse, which was mostly influenced and guided by Roddenberry until his death. And then even after he passed, Rick Berman, Michael Piller, Jerry Taylor, these main, creators and showrunners, even Brannon Braga, Ron Moore, they shepherded Trek in a much more Roddenberry-esque fashion. They never, not to the letter of the law, so to speak, not to, a total inflexibility, but they always were like, is this something that Gene would approve of? Or certainly, is this something that Gene Roddenberry would consider Star Trekkian? Of course, deviations, departures, obviously Deep Space Nine, probably the biggest departure in terms of the look. It was an alien space station. Voyager lost in space, so to speak, but still a Starfleet vessel, even though the Maquis were, interesting little, thorn in Janeway's side at times. But again, so my premise is Gene Roddenberry is Star Trek because of his core philosophy. So now, what is that core philosophy? Now, I can't answer it in a word or two, a sentence, even one podcast here, not one show, nothing. But I can say from not only writing for the show myself, going through the writing Bibles, obviously watching the episodes, knowing what Gene was always trying to get at. And I think the scene in First Contact with Zefram Cochrane when he says, you're all astronauts on some kind of Star Trek. And Troy and Riker and Geordi are, like war and poverty, it's erased within a lifetime or two. So that's really, I think, where everyone can agree that Gene Roddenberry shined. He promoted this idea that within 200, 300, 400 years that people would get their act together and they would protect each other and try to make the planet as best as possible. They would still be, I think Roddenberry, I'm not, pinning this down for sure, but I think Roddenberry would still recognize there could be some crime, or, certainly people wouldn't be perfect. There are some stories that say he wanted, it to be almost like a utopia, that Earth would become a utopia. There would be no crime, perhaps. But I think, again, the core and foundational thing and the premise that Roddenberry tried to promote was that humanity would be protective of its own. And in only that way, and when that was, possible, when that was established and completed, no hunger, no poverty, no war, then we could go out truly into the galaxy, into the cosmos, and truly explore and bring our sense of humanity and community. Because how can we get ourselves, how can we go out and explore when we can't even get our own act together on Earth? So this is, one I wanted to do for a while. I, stand by the foundation of my premise. I'm certainly names such as D.C. Fontana, Gene L. Kuhn, David Gerrold from the original series, writers, producers who contributed a huge amount. In fact, a lot of people were saying for years that Star Trek was really created by the two Genes, Gene Roddenberry and Gene L. Kuhn. His contribution was vast. Dorothy Fontana, D.C. Fontana, David Gerrold. I mean, these are true developers, creatives, and writers that contributed an enormous amount of backstory, writing episodes and character development. So, but again, the core philosophy is what I'm talking about. The core, and it reminds me of certain other science fiction or fantasy, even comic book characters. You look at Superman, right? For years, he could do anything almost. I believe the radio show, not the comic book writers, came up with kryptonite. And I think it was because someone was on vacation or something. I guess maybe the actor or whatever. The idea, they came up with something to make Superman weaker and limited because he could do anything. And I think in the Roddenberry Star Trek philosophy, if humanity is a utopia, if there is no crime or hatred or racism or anything, then it's got a little too perfect. So then writers have to come up with something and do an end run around it, right? They have to get around that, and that spurs stimulation. That stimulates creativity. So for that, you could argue that maybe Roddenberry's, insistence on utopia provided a challenge to writers, maybe one that the writers and producers resisted and resented at times, but it certainly was challenging to them. So there you go, guys. I'd love to hear your feedback. I'd love to hear some comments, see what you think, what you take away from Gene Roddenberry is Star Trek. Hope you're enjoying. Hope you're subscribing. If not, just hit the subscribe button. And there you go. So live long and prosper, and we'll see you soon.
Your logic was impeccable, Captain.